the Greenwich Workshop presents the interaction between life and art, intimate perspectives from the palette of the living canvas.
A lot has been written and said about what happened 50 years ago, Pearl Harbor, and some of it's wrong, some of it's right. I'll tell you how it was for Ken Taylor.
Japan destroyed most of the U.S. battleship in the harbor, but failed to sink down the morale of the U.S. Navy and her people.
We had taken pictures on Formosa of over 200 Japanese planes, and the only American targets within their range was the Philippine Islands.
Our country may lose this war, but I will not. I win. I will win. I will win my own way to the finals.
When Saburo got on my tail and put that hole in my wing, I said, my God, this is the first day of the war, my first mission, and I'm going to die.
We are going to win this war, and we are going to win the peace that follows.
50 years after the Empire of Japan brought the United States into World War II, former adversaries met for the first time in friendship to show respect and to reminisce about the heroics and fortunes of war. The surprise attacks on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and Clark Field in the Philippines were reviewed by the men who fought there at a retrospective symposium and Confederate Air Force Airshow reenactment hosted by the Admiral Nimitz Museum in Fredericksburg, Texas, which brought back all the memories. Their accounts of what took place in December of 1941 have been preserved and documented in the aviation images of contemporary artists. P-40s getting airborne to defend Pearl Harbor against Val dive bombers is portrayed by Craig Codera, who brings you the Pearl Harbor story. And the American fighters battling Japanese Zeros hours later above the devastation of Clark Field is presented by Keith Ferris.
The B-17.
In this 50th anniversary tribute to the brave patriots on both sides who fought for their countries and way of life, we invite you to reflect with them as they relive memories of war.
Airplanes, airplanes, airplanes. Anything that flies, anything that has to do with flying, people who fly. It's my life. When I was very young, my parents, who lived about 5 miles north of here from Los Angeles International, would bring me down here at night when I couldn't sleep as a baby. And we would sit at the end of the runway and watch airplanes come and go and landing. And things were a lot quieter then. This is 1956. My grandmother lived right underneath the approach to what are now the north runways. My dad was in the aerospace industry. My uncle was head of maintenance at LA Airways. I had another uncle who was in the Air Force as a general, and he was second in command on the Doolittle raid. The family lived and breathed aviation. I'm a professional pilot and a professional artist, and it just works beautifully. And I think that you can see a real difference in the artwork. The first chance I had to put airplanes on the canvas, away we went. Unless you're up in the air, looking at airplanes, watching airplanes, flying with other airplanes, as I had a chance to do in the Air Force, and we did a lot of formation flying, you don't have an appreciation for the dynamics of flying. Here's the perfect example of the use of aviation art, and perhaps today, my single most important role as an aviation artist, and that is to portray history. There are very few events in the political history of the United States of America as important as the attack on Pearl Harbor. In the space of 1 hour, our entire concept of ourselves as a nation and our role as a nation within the world changed. It changed irrevocably. History as we know it began at Pearl Harbor.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
It is vitally important that the art community, who involves itself with the telling of history, chronicle the Pearl Harbor event from many different perspectives and give some fresh perspective to what it is that happened to us that Sunday morning.
Admiral Yamamoto also wanted to give American people a big impression of crazy Japanese. He wanted American people to think it'll be too dangerous to fight against Japan. Unthinkable, unbelievable Japanese.
I was trained to do this job. I thought I was a pretty good pilot. I found out later I wasn't quite as good as I thought I was, but I felt like I could handle this, and I wasn't in the least bit afraid of the fact that we were greatly outnumbered. I knew that. But I felt we could take care of ourselves, and we did.
In spite of the terrific pounding, our pilots and mechanics were able to get 4 P-40s and 2 P-36s in the air within the first 30 minutes and offer some resistance. In the face of overwhelming odds, Lieutenants Harry Brown, Robert Rogers, Kenneth Taylor, John Webster, and George Welch, among many others, fought back as best they could.
You know, the interesting thing about history is that the farther away from an event you get, the clearer the vision of that event. A lot of preconceptions disappear, a lot of wariness on the part of individuals because of political reasons might disappear. People pass away, vaults are opened. Suddenly, there are new and fresh concepts relating to historic events which we thought we understood well. It will be very interesting to see during the roundtable discussions here at the symposium whether or not we discover some new and fresh perspectives on December 7th, 1941.
For those of you who have seen the movie Tora, 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 as I have a number of times, that scene is indelibly etched in which the 2 young pilots race off to get into their fighter planes. One of the factors that made the Japanese air raid so successful was the lack of much fighter effort. We are very fortunate today to have one of those 2 pilots here, retired Brigadier General Kenneth M. Taylor, U.S. Air Force retired, first U.S. pilot, one of the first 2 to see action, shot down 6 Japanese aircraft during the Pacific Campaign and was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. He subsequently retired after 26 years of Air Force duty, General Taylor.
I was a member of the 47th Pursuit Squadron stationed at Wheeler Field. Much has been said about how so few of our airplanes could get airborne. Well, of course, we weren't on the alert. We were on a anti-sabotage alert, which meant that the airplanes were all neatly aligned, perfect position to be strafed. My airplane, fortunately, was at a little field 10 miles north called Haleiwa. Well, this allowed me the good fortune of being able to get to an airplane that had not been damaged.
7:58. A message goes out to the world. Air raid Pearl Harbor. This is no drill.
Well, I think this airplane, the P-40, was probably the most beautiful airplane that I ever flew, of course, and that includes a lot of airplanes. I would be rather fond of this one because it brought me through some tight places. I was at Haleiwa Field, my squadron, the 47th, for gunnery practice, and the commander, Captain Austin, decided, well, it's a weekend, and why don't we just let the guys go back to the big city and back to Wheeler Field and enjoy it. We went to the city. We knew some ladies down there, some friends of ours, and so we bundled up, went downtown, and had a few drinks. Went to the Officers Club at Hickam. Got in back to Wheeler very, very late. And the poker game that you probably read a great deal about was indeed in progress, but that was one night I really wasn't participating in that game. I went on to bed maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And then I was awakened like everybody else on Oahu that morning, I think shortly before 8 o'clock. And the first thing that I saw when I jumped up, looked out the window, was a Val going by, like Mr. Obby's, red star on it, and the whole field was in flames. I was confused to start with. I thought maybe the Navy has had a maneuver. We used to go around and beat one another's fields up for practice, and it became obvious that this was no practice, that it was the real thing.
This aircraft has been well known as Val by American code name. The proper Japanese name is Navy Type 99 carrier-borne bomber. It had been well developed by the beginning of the Pacific War. Both ground crew and combat crew got very skillful at this aircraft. I was very attached to it. I flew on Val all through the entire war. I went to the Pearl Harbor on this aircraft too. In April 1941, I became a squadron leader on carrier Akagi. I participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor as a rear squadron leader of the carrier-borne bombers in the second wave. By the time we took off, of course, the first wave of the raid had been all gone, and we had been informed that there will not be Enterprise nor Lexington in the Pearl Harbor. They were primary targets of our attack. Therefore, I was feeling rather discouraged. As we advanced, my observer told me, "Squadron leader, I have just received Tora, Tora, Tora," and I felt good. Like General Taylor said, it was probably obviously a horrible situation on the ground at the time.
They were coming right over the Officers Club. Some of their shots, I'm sure they weren't targeting the Officers Club, would come whistling down one hall, and in the other hall, and our telephone, the only telephone, was not in our room, but out on the corner of one of these corridors. So I ran to the phone along with George Welch, and we called our squadron at the 47th out there, and the armor answered the phone, and we told him to get our airplanes ready. And so then we tried to decide how we could get out of that officers' club without being shot. And this was somewhat of a problem because they were strafing the field. They were all over it at that moment and coming right over my car. It's a mystery to me how they failed to get any shots in it. Took me about 10 minutes to get to Haleiwa, which is, 10 miles, thereabouts. Planes were ready. We jumped in them, 2 of us, and off we went. George and I just split up in line abreast and got right into the middle of them. And let me tell you, that broke that party up very quickly. The planes were quit their strafing fairly quickly and started heading back out to sea, and I knocked one down on the very first pass. It just went back to Wheeler Field, landed. And the armors were arming the planes, and we looked up over the horizon toward Pearl Harbor, and here was another group coming up the valley.
I felt as if I were sitting at the very end, at the very highest end of the audience seat in some big theater, looking out over the entire 78 airplanes. By the time I was flying over Kaneohe, I already began to see some 200 or maybe 300 of barrages of anti-aircraft guns all tangled up, exploding at the altitude of 3,500 meters, that is 12,000 feet, right above the Ford Island toward which I was flying. This was my first campaign. When I took off our ship, I didn't have any particular feelings of life and death, but as might be expected, when I saw this with my own eyes, I felt a cold shiver run through my spine. Then we were signaled to make preparations for action. We gave each other more space. Then we started making easy right turn around Diamond Head, flew over Waikiki. Then we approached Ford Island from its southeast side.
Wheeler Field in those days had no runways. It was a big grass field. And I was able to take off exactly toward them. And that worked out beautifully. They would have had to fly into the ground to get a good lead on me, and in the meantime I could take a shot at them even before my wheels got off the ground. So it worked out fine. I came up, did a chandelle, got right on one's tail, and was busy with him. A little excited, so dang excited that I didn't turn on my gun sight, so you can imagine that I was beginning to realize that the real war was on. And about that time, I got some shots through the canopy and through my arm. Exploded when they hit the trim tab, and a few splinters in my leg. I had downed one, and I followed one at sea, and this was another smoking Val.
The squadron of carrier bombers in the second wave were ordered to concentrate our ultimate attack upon enemy ships, the battleships, because there was no aircraft carriers. As I was searching my future target, I recognized several battleships lined up in 2 rows on the east side of the Ford Island. The torpedoes would be much more effective to attack on the ships on the east side, that is outside, ocean side of the row. I left them to a torpedo squadron. I chose one of the battleships anchoring on the inside row. I decided to attack the ship with a 55-degree angle from the island side. Later on, I was told that ship was Arizona.
船に爆撃しました。これがまあ後でアリゾナということが分かったわけです。で爆撃自分の機関銃でもってね。
I have never strafed the ground with my own machine gun after bombing raid. Never once, all through the entire war. I was a commander of my squadron. I was the leader responsible for 9 aircraft and the people in them. I only wanted to gather my men immediately after the raid. My second wingman, the second plane in my element, didn't join me. They were gone. They were all shut down.
When I was diving toward the battleship,
Yes?
I concentrate in the scope. So if I watch the anti-aircraft gun or interceptor, cannot hit target. So I did nothing else.
To view these men who took part in the greatest conflict in the history of the world, the history of man, and to see that they're just men. Here they are 50 years later, and to touch them and to know that this person was in such and such airplane at such and such time, a great historic moment. Amazing, fantastic, like the history books coming alive, people walking out of the pages of textbooks.
So we can talk together today.
At this Confederate Air Force reenactment, honored guests of the symposium and the public watched Japanese aircraft launch the assault on Pearl.
The date, December the 7th, 1941.
Within 2 hours, 188 planes were destroyed and 19 ships damaged. 5 of them sank. In all, over 2,400 casualties. A Val dive bomber, representative of Zenji Abe's, prepares to fulfill its mission.
I'd like to make it clear that I have absolutely no animosity toward the military people that were obviously ordered to do exactly what they were doing. Had I been ordered to do the same thing, I would have probably have done it. I've grown fond of Mr. Abe. He's a gentleman. I'm quite sure he was an officer and a gentleman, and this is what we all strive to do in the military.
Watch now, ladies and gentlemen, as the B-17 comes in and tries to land at Hickam Field.
B-17s coming in from California ran head-on into the Japanese forces. And many of them, low on fuel, had to find landing sites. P-40 fighters were destroyed on the ground, but a few men whose aircraft were parked outside of the center of attack managed to get to their planes and take off.
Ken Taylor, the pilot of the first P-40, is here on the field today. There we go.
The odds against them were enormous. Ken Taylor's efforts are remembered here today and exemplify the country's courage to fight back. Courage not unnoticed by his adversaries of the day.
In Japan, we have this term, Yamato Damashi. That is a common expression representing the fighting spirit of Japanese warriors. The spirit to fight for the country that is not only for Japanese people, Admiral Yamamoto underestimated the American people's fighting spirit to defend their country. If I put myself in General Taylor's shoes, I perhaps could not even take off.
Most of us were fortunate enough to get up at Pearl Harbor, and I know that there weren't very many. We're very lucky.
The Star-Spangled Banner was played frequently that day. Our shores were invaded. Day one of a great patriotic war.
Was there anybody else other than Lieutenant Welch and yourself who actually took off for the counterfight against us on that day?
Well, as far as I know, George and I were the only airplanes that got into the air on the first wave. And as I've explained, that's because our planes were out at Haleiwa. Several were shot down. Several got off in between the waves, which would put them up in the second wave. There were, I think, about 5 more, plus our 2 airplanes, which meant 7. The symposium has got me to thinking how fortunate it was that here I've met Mr. Hobby here, and how fortunate it was that we didn't meet 50 years ago. One of us wouldn't be here. So it does get you to thinking about events that happened a long time ago, and I'd much rather have him alive from this raid and both of us here.
After the end of war, I spent about 18 months in a camp in Guam as a POW. I returned to my country in December 1946. I saw the result of atomic bomb. I was only wondering what I should do to support my wife and children. I could not afford to look back upon my past, but in time, I picked up some books and gathered information. When I read the book Tora, 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 I learned there were such brave warriors in the hell-like situation who actually took off in their planes, then counterfought against us. What brave men they were. And this time, I'm so impressed, much more than I could ever say, to get to meet General Taylor. I was a little bit nervous in the beginning, and now this is a joy to be with him. Originally, the attack on Clark Field was definitely planned to be made almost at the same time as the attack on Pearl Harbor.
My real belief that we were going to go to war is when I was getting shot at. That's how naive I was. 23 years old, and I just didn't believe the Japanese would attack us. I was an optimist, and I was wrong 100%.
From bases in Formosa, Japanese planes now head for the Philippines. They were to strike Iba and Clark Fields right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But bad weather has thrown their attack 6 hours behind schedule. The Japanese are worried. They fear they have lost the element of surprise. They are afraid the Americans are expecting them.
Fighter pilots are all the same, whether they're on, no matter what uniform they're wearing, they're all out there hanging their tails on the line. It's a one-on-one sport in the end, and a very deadly one, because one's going to win and one's going to lose. And it's interesting to see when it's all over and behind us, to find these people, you know, they're all together as kindred spirits. Sakai is the highest scoring surviving Japanese ace of World War II, with 64 victories. Sakai turned out to be one of the great Japanese fighter pilots, and he was a real expert. He was a flight leader, and there he was down there chasing Sam Gracchio into the smoke, which is what he did that day. Meanwhile, Sam Gracchio, who was originally part of a six-ship flight taking off from Nichols, headed up towards Clark before the attack even started, and one by one those P-40s had to land because of oil on their windshields. They were brand new airplanes, hadn't been broken in, so they ended up with 2 aircraft. And when they arrived over Clark, it had already been bombed, and that's where he got involved with Sakai.
I shrunk too. A lot of memories. It brings Saburo Sakai in clear focus.
The 3 that got airborne out of Clark, Joe Moore and his 2 wingmen, could just as well have been hit by the bombs. They were just, it was the luck of a few seconds that those 3 were able to escape. And then they went up and did the best they could against terrific odds.
The surprise attack is devastating. In simultaneous raids on Clark and Iba Fields, more than 100 planes are completely destroyed. On the first day of war, the Far East Air Force, the backbone of the Philippine defense, is broken.
We had taken pictures on Formosa of over 200 Japanese planes, and the only American targets within their range was the Philippine Islands. So we fully anticipated. We'd been briefed, and we were sitting on the alert, waiting and ready. But all of the communications, all of alarm alert systems failed. And when the fog kept them from taking off early morning when they had expected to hit us, and we were in the air, completely alert and ready, nothing happened. We got back on the ground to refuel, and then they came in unannounced and caught us on the ground.
Fighter pilots like Joseph Moore, Grant Mahoney, and Samuel Merritt fought a delaying action. Never knowing if their temporary bases would be safe for return, they prepared to engage the enemy.
And there were 3 of us, and we were coming this way, and they were coming, and they all dived down to one of my number 3 man, way behind.
So you were above his...
I was about 10,000 feet, and I was circling over a column of black smoke, and flames were billowing out of the top of the smoke.
I paint for the people who fly the airplanes and are involved with the aircraft. I think what my mission is to tell their story.
joined the Society of Illustrators at their invitation and was immediately sent off on an Air Force art tour in which the orders allowed me to fly. And starting with the B-52 mission in 1961, I took it from there and began to fly T-38s and T-37s in training command to get a little experience with the stick and rudder. And then in 31 years, I've got over 300 hours of jet fighter time, including deployment to Southeast Asia as a backseater in a F-4E, with the first squadron of F-4Es to go out there. So I basically was able to play fighter pilot and paint airplanes at the same time. You know, I'm often asked what my favorite aircraft is, and I have to admit it's the good old B-17. And I got to know this aircraft real well in 1976 while I was working on a 25-foot high by 75-foot mural of the B-17 in the World War II gallery of the National Air and Space Museum. The B-17 was the primary target of the Japanese when they attacked Clark Field on 8 December 1941.
Late in this fall, B-17s began to arrive. The only field in the Philippine Islands capable of supporting the operations of a fully loaded B-17 was the Clark Field. There were 34 there when the war began.
So Burl, when you took off from Taiwan, what was his briefing that he received? What mission was defined for him? What was he supposed to do?
54機の爆撃隊がクラークフィールドを
They started with 54 bomber planes. Of course, he was the fighter, so his major mission was to protect bombers to pursue whatever the mission was. And also, he was told whatever the aircraft and oil tank and buildings, everything, just to attack and destroy everything in the Clark Field.
They expected the Japanese to attack the Philippines. They did not expect them to attack Pearl Harbor. We were to absorb the first blow. We were not to take the first offensive act. So when we got word that Honolulu was being bombed over the open radio, non-authenticated, not official, our bomb commander wanted to go to Formosa and bomb the Japanese planes that we knew were there. General MacArthur's headquarters refused permission based on the fact that we didn't know there was a war on, and we were not going to make the first offensive act. We were not going to make an act of aggression. We thought our plans were to allow us to absorb the first blow, and it would have had they come in the morning when we were all off the ground, in the air, ready to fight.
After more than 3 hours in the air, the American planes have made no contact with the Japanese. Relieved, they returned to their bases for refueling.
It was a very foggy morning.
それでその間に今度クラークフィールド岩から攻撃されたら大変だと思った我々は。
Oh, so like you were waiting in your cockpit, they were waiting for the signal too. That was a long, long time. And the whole time, my father and all other fighter pilots were very nervous because they, like they said, their job is to protect bombers. Every bomber has a full bombs. They were looking around the whole time. If B-17 comes before they took off for this particular mission, the whole planning will be jeopardized.
And we waited, and we waited. We didn't get the word. My operations, group operations, did not give me word to scramble. But suddenly, one of the airmen saw, "Yonder they come." And I looked up, and your bombers coming in, a line abreast, from the west, So we cranked the engines and tried to get off, and only 3 planes got airborne.
その離陸するの私見た。
He saw you taking off.
3 planes. The bombs fell and killed 4 of my pilots running down the runway. No other planes got off Clark Field that day. I did not resent being caught on the ground at Clark. We weren't happy about the situation. I think we all resented being stuck over there with the families going home and nothing happening. When the war began, all of us thought, gee, this is great. It'll be over soon. We'll get to go home.
朝午前2時に起きて準備してたら
I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. All of us got ready for the sortie. Then we realized the thick fog came on. We just killed time waiting. While we were waiting, we were informed that Pearl Harbor was attacked. I felt rather vexed a little. I wanted to be the first rider in the charge.
コックピットでもう早くスタートしたいと。
In the cockpit, I was so anxious. I just wanted to go now. I was stamping my feet. If enemy planes descend upon us now, I was so anxious. Just like the horses in the horse race, the jockey right before they begin racing at the gate, they are stamping. They just try to go forward. That's how I felt in my cockpit. I knew the American fighters would be much more powerful than all of the pilots I have previously encountered in China. By 1 p.m. in Japanese time, we took off finally, and then reached directly over the Clark Field. All the bombers we escorted dropped the bombs successfully. A tremendous explosion all over the base was visible. However, I also saw more than 20 B-17s on the ground through the gaps of the black smoke. So I began to descend with my 2 wingmen toward the field to strafe remaining aircraft. But then we encountered 2 P-40s in the process, so I started to chase one of them.
When he initiated his attack, as I recall it, I'm quite sure I was pretty close to 10,000 feet. And before I went down, I looked back, and there were the 2 zeros. And that's when I broke left.
Oh, I see.
And that's when he hit me with a 20-millimeter cannon.
We have just begun to fight against the United States. Are we going to win? Maybe not. Our country may lose this war, but I will not. I win. I will win. I will win my own way to the finals. Then I die as a warrior. Samurai is always well prepared to offer his life for his country because that is his pride to his own heart. And his ultimate goal is to defend his people. In the most of the air fights I was engaged in, my victory was made in a split second. I found him, shot him, he went down, just like a phantom in my dream. My original eyesight was beyond your belief. If you don't believe me, it is your own choice. I practiced to be able to find the star in the daylight, which I developed my vision to do so. Not all the time, but sometimes in my life during wartime, as I was flying actively, I really did see little stars in the blue sky.
The only time I ever fired the gun was over the Pacific Ocean off of Hamilton Field. I fired at a slick, a silver slick in the ocean. I never had any air-to-air flying at targets, at airborne targets. About 11:30 that morning, we got a scramble order. 4 of us leaped off, and we had no instructions, So we thought the best way to go would be up to Clark Field. Flew over Clark Field. It was a beautiful day. Blue sky, bright sun, and very smooth air. When we got over Clark Field, we looked down, everything was peaceful, so we decided to fly over towards the China Sea coast, which we did. Well, when I heard the tower operator state transmit all P-40s return to Clark Field, enemy bombers overhead, and he repeated this 3 times, and the 3rd time, actually, he was hysterical, and when he opened the mic transmitting, I could hear the bombs going off. And then when I got close to Clark Field and I saw what devastation had occurred there, fires, and there was just nothing left to Clark Field. And of course, my next experience was when Saburo got on my tail and put that hole in my wing. I said, my God, this is the first day of the war, my first mission, and I'm going to die. And believe me, I started praying in that cockpit. And then when I saw the tracers come by, I got encouraged by that. I figured, well, hell, I'm out running. I did just what my squadron commander told me to do. Don't try to stay there and air-to-air combat them because they'll turn inside of you. So I went into this dive, and that's what saved me, really. Well, I sailed on the President Coolidge on the 1st of November of 1941, and on board that ship were several graduates, current graduates of the National War College, senior colonels. And overhearing some of their conversation, to a man, they stated the Japanese wouldn't be stupid enough to attack us. And I was very naive, and I believed this.
Captain Samuel C. Gracchio, who escaped from a Japanese prison.
My feeling at the time was that the existing forces in the Philippines was just a temporary thing, that certainly aid would be on our way, that we'd be resupplied, more aircraft would come in. And I believed that almost up to the time of the surrender. And even as a prisoner of war, I believed, you know, that they're going to come back. They're not going to abandon us. But then as time went on, we figured that God knows how long are we going to be here. But I never lost confidence that ultimately we would win the war. I never lost that confidence.
We're all gathered here together as friends with the Japanese, delighted to have them here. As Colonel Gracchio and I were discussing yesterday, this is now, that was then. Then was much different.
4 days ago, I was told by the staff of the Admiral Nimitz Museum that pilot of the P-40 I chased after over the Clark Field was Colonel Gracchio, sitting on the same stage right next to me. "50 years ago, Colonel Gracchio was my enemy. I shot him and I damaged his plane in the sky over the Clark Field. And today, I want to let him know, I want to let Colonel Gracchio, of course, General Moore, know. I always knew his life has been always as meaningful as my own is. We fought against the US and we lost the war. But I only hope that Japan and the US will always be allies with a strong sense of trust to enjoy the time of peace. I especially want to express my deepest sympathy to the families of those who fought for their country and who are hurt or killed, treading through every battle, and I pray for the repose of the souls of all the people for both US and Japan.
Almighty God, Father of us all, on this occasion commemorating the 50th anniversary of the tragic devastation at Pearl Harbor and Clark Field, with sorrow in our hearts, but still with a deep sense of pride, we remember those brave sailors, Marines, soldiers, and airmen who gave their lives so that we could live in peace and freedom. These honored dead rest in hallowed graves in the depths of Pearl Harbor, at their battle stations on board the Arizona, and graves in Hawaii and the Philippines. They did not die in vain. They are not forgotten. They live nobly in our hearts and prayers. We owe them our eternal gratitude for what they did to preserve our cherished American freedom.
One enemy, two cultures, two countries, and 50 years later, new friendships are formed, created out of the ultimate differences of opinion, a world war. Men and their machines of war have returned on these days in Texas to remember what hell it was back then, and to share feelings today of mutual respect as kindred spirits of battle. These brave aviators had jobs to do, and they did them. And they can only hope during this week of reunion that in future generations, we will not find the need for it to ever happen again.